Throughout time, numerous civilizations have risen only to fall. Some left behind great monuments, while some faded into obscurity, leaving behind fragments of what they once were. And today, we're going to be looking at two of them, comparing their abilities, and seeing which one would come out on top in a death battle. Oh wait, wrong script. Today, we'll be comparing arguably the most beautiful pieces of 17th to 18th century architecture, those being the St. Peter's Basilica in Italy and the Blue Mosque in Turkey. These two pieces of architecture have their own unique history, and we'll be covering them today, starting with the St. Peter's Basilica, or should I say the new St. Peter's Basilica, because, by the way, there was an old one, we'll get to that later, had finished being built in the early 17th century, around 1626 CE, but it actually had started being built during the very, very early 16th century, around 1506 CE. Around that time, Pope Julius II commissioned one Donato Bramante to build a new basilica to replace the old one, because it was basically beyond repair by that point. Yes, sir, you wanted to see me? Yes, I was wondering if you could tear down that basilica for me. The whole basilica. Yes. Okay. It's becoming too unsightly. I don't want unsightly things in my country. Sir, our country is inside of Rome. Anyways, I need you and a bunch of other artists to demolish that old church and build a new one. This is very ambitious of you, sir. Well, you know the phrase, go big or go home? Well, we're already at home, so we can't do anything other than go big. Okay, I guess. So that's what they did. Through the help of many, many, many artists, they successfully managed to build the new basilica within the short time frame of 120 years. Oh my god. Now, this building is impressive. It has the highest ceiling in the world at a whopping 137.8 meters. And let's not forget his beautiful interior, decorated with gorgeous stucco figures, mosaics, and gold sculptures, as well as numerous marble figures all around the building. It's probably the most impressive church ever made, which is probably why it's such a popular pilgrimage site. It also takes inspiration from pieces of classical Roman architecture, namely the Roman Pantheon, which makes sense given their similarly sized domes in terms of diameter. Well, the thing is, though, even though the Pantheon's dome was, larger in terms of diameter, the Basilica's dome is way taller, which is very impressive, even if the Pantheon can manage to pull off a huge dome with the hole in the middle. Sometime around the early 17th century, a man named Ahmed I was very embarrassed at his prior military failure, and really wanted to do literally anything he could just to make people forget about it. Welp, that military failure was definitely a failure. Just how can I hope to recover from this? I could make people forget it, but how? Wait a minute. Wait a minute! So Ahmed I decided to build an absolutely huge mosque in order to not only distract people from the military failure, but also to cement a powerful legacy, even greater than his father, also known as Suleiman the Magnificent, who, in case you didn't know, basically revolutionized the Ottoman Empire through his military conquests. So yeah, you're setting your expectations a tad bit high. Maybe you should just lower them a bit. Wouldn't want you getting too much of the old hubris. In addition to this, he also really wanted to stick it to those Byzantine chumps that his empire was the superior one. However, people were a bit unwilling to give him money due to the fact that they thought he should be funding the military instead. But he continued anyway, starting construction in the year 1609 and finishing it around 1616. Oh, and by the way, side note, the Wikipedia article does say it was finished around 1723 CE, but every other source said 1616 CE, so I went with that just because of the fact that it appears everywhere else, and also Wikipedia isn't that reliable. To make matters more confusing, the Wikipedia page itself stated that it was in fact completed by 1616 CE, but it was recently edited to 1723 CE. So I don't know if it was vandalism, I don't know if they know something we don't, but I'm gonna stick to 1616 CE just because of Wikipedia. Anyway, back to the video. And to really stick it to those Byzantine losers, this mosque had 6 minarets, which, by the way, are basically really tall towers from which people in the Muslim religion are asked to pray from, instead of the usual 4 that adorn most mosques. This building is generally known for being one of the, if not the most famous mosque in the entire world, and it's easy to see why, especially due to the intricacy of its design, which includes the obvious blue color, as well as the many, many domes adorning the building. The mosque was, similar to the St. Peter's Basilica, inspired by religious buildings around where the mosque is today, such as the Byzantine churches that used to be constructed there, as well as the general style of building used in Islamic Ottoman architecture. There are several things that make these buildings very similar. For one thing, they're both religious buildings, which usually means they're also super intricate and very beautifully made, both being considered some of the greatest pieces of architecture of their respective eras and locations. In addition to this, the buildings were also both modeled after pieces of architecture left there by the Romans, with the Basilica being based off of the Roman Pantheon, and the Blue Mosque being made out of spite, basing its design off of the old Byzantine churches. Additionally, they both have gigantic domes on top of their respective buildings. Looking at it at a more figurative level, both were made to cover up something, with that being literally, in the case of the St. Peter's Basilica, whose job was to cover up the degradation of the old one. Or it could be figuratively, as in the case of the Blue Mosque, who was covering up the military failures of Sultan Ahmed I. But while these buildings do have their similarities, there are also a good number of differences as well. First and foremost, they're shaped very differently, as the St. Peter's Basilica, outside of its very large dome, is very rectangular, whereas the Blue Mosque is just, oops, all domes. Additionally, while they're both religious buildings, the religions they were built for are quite different. And while they were inspired by pieces of Roman and Byzantine architecture, the time frames for the inspirations don't really line up. Aside from a couple other obvious differences, namely geographic location as well as the empires they were a part of, there aren't really too many differences between the two. In conclusion, these two pieces of architecture are both iconic and amazing in their own ways, but it's interesting to see just how similar they are as well. Now, I have not seen either of these structures personally, but if you can, once the travel restrictions let up, I highly recommend you doing so. The winner of this death battle is... Okay, how did that script get in here again? I thought I got rid of it. That's all for today, and thanks for watching.